Hi friends, how are you? I'm Nicole and this is Crimes with Cole. So hello. How are you guys doing today? And welcome back for part 2. Just a recap on part 1 of the Gibbon sisters, better known as the silent twins, was that June and Jennifer had developed this twin language, but it started to concern their father when the twins refused to speak to anybody else except for each other and would not make any eye contact, would not come down to hang out with the family, to watch TV, to do anything except to eat. When the family had moved once more due to the father's job, this is when the father decided that he was going to reach out and find what school was going to be best suitable for his girls and their very bizarre behaviors. Because remember, previously, when they were going all through school, from the moment they started, in kindergarten until they were about 14 years old, nobody really made any ruckus of it because of their exceptional school performance and their behavior in school. They didn't start any trouble. So they were just classified as extremely shy children. Now it's starting to concern their father. So their father had reached out to a psychiatrist. And when this psychiatrist decided to start speaking with the girls to really start digging in there and finding out why these girls are only speaking to one another and nobody else. So we're going to get into part 2 of the Gibbon sisters, better known as the silent twins. So the girls are now attending a school that is better suited with the resources that they need to help them become individuals and not so much reliant on one another. Because at this point, their dad feels like if they can separate the twins to become their own person, that is going to be what is best for them. Once the staff got to really examine the girls, they discovered that the girls were never going to become more social with other people if they continued to be together. The two girls felt they didn't need any other relationships besides for with each other. But the staff made note that it now seemed like June was being controlled by her sister and felt that if they could get June away long enough from Jennifer, that June could make some progress. They felt one of the girls should remain there at Eastgate at the current facility that their dad had researched and spoke to a psychiatrist about that would best suit them, and the other one should be sent to an adolescent unit at Carr Martin. At first, the girls seemed to be excited that they were going to be separated. June even wrote in her journal, "People keep telling us to change, to turn over a new leaf, but we are waiting for each other to start first. So if we separate, neither of us will know if we changed first. If we separate now, the future will be good for the pair of us." But when the day came for, the one sister to leave, both girls panicked. They somehow obtained home phone numbers to the staff at the facility and started calling them, telling them that they would start speaking next week and please don't separate us. But when push came to shove, in school, they remained to stay silent and they did not keep their word. The doctor finally brought them together and basically told them, one of you have to leave. You can pick which one leaves, but one of you have got to go. Otherwise, you will never make progress. And what happened next shocked everybody. Both girls rose at the same time, locking eyes on one another, and in the blink of an eye, Jennifer raised her hand up in like the shape of a claw and lunged towards June, clawing at her cheek. June grabbed Jennifer's hair and just started yanking it until clumps of hair was falling out. Thomas finally jumped between the girls, prying them apart from one another. Jennifer stayed at Eastgate, and June was sent off to St. Davis Adolescent Unit. They both soon turned 15 after June had arrived at, St. David's. And the staff tried to throw her a little party, trying to make it easier, try to give her something to look forward to. But she had no response. She just stood motionless. And most of the time, she never even got out of bed. When she finally was removed physically from bed, she kept her body still and had to be propped up against the wall and stood there crying silently. Tears would actually roll down her cheeks, and the staff would go over periodically and wipe her eyes and her nose. And she just stood there unbothered by it, unbothered by them, wiping her face, just missing her sister. However, in her journal, she expressed anger and not sadness. She wrote, Jay was in Eastgate, enjoying her life, going home to her own bed, seeing her own family, eating familiar food. I had to suffer the torment of listening to strange conversations, eating strange food I would not eat with people at a table. Less than 2 months after arriving at the school, June was returned to Eastgate because of her insubordinate behavior. Once she had returned to Eastgate, both girls became extremely rebellious against the staff. They refused to take part in any therapy or even their schoolwork at this point. Tim Thomas took note that Jennifer now had more control than ever over June and did not want her to show any signs of individuality. If June did make the slightest move before Jennifer would become enraged and would chant a lot of the time to June, "You are Jennifer. You are me," over and over and over again. The staff at Eastgate had given up on the twins. There was no way that they could get through to them, so for the last year of schooling, the girls were allowed to basically kind of do what they wanted as long as it wasn't causing a disruption. Lance Kennedy was a 16-year-old American boy who was sent to Eastgate because of his problematic behavior. Lance had this bad boy image and bragged about his criminal past, and June and Jennifer both fell infatuated with this boy. It didn't help that the twins were already enamored with kind of anything to do with America. So now here's this American boy who's a tall, blonde, good-looking kid, and you see why they both became just love-struck when they laid eyes on him. And while the twins followed Lance around like lovesick puppies, Lance felt sorry for the twins. He didn't think much of them because everyone at the school just felt like they were just odd. They didn't have any friends and they didn't speak to anyone and were bullied a lot still. But that didn't stop the twins from leaving little love notes to Lance. They would slip them into his notebook or his coat pockets, his little pack of cigarettes that he probably shouldn't have had. He had no idea that the notes were from the twins. The twins left Eastgate at 17 years old in 1979. And while they had no plans for furthering their education, Gloria and Aubrey were just going to register them for unemployment benefit. By this time, the girls would not even sit in the same room as their parents or other siblings. The only time they came out of their room would be to sit in an empty living room to watch TV. But if the room had someone in it, then they would stay in their room. On occasion, they would write a letter asking whoever it was that was in the living room to leave the living room so that they could come out and watch TV. Other than that, the girls stayed hidden away. The only time they left the house was to go into town to pick up their benefit check once a week. Their mother would take up the food, leave it at the door of the bedroom for them, and Rosie, the youngest sister whom they shared a room with, was the only one that they interacted with privately. And I think that's only because, they shared a room together. I think that if the girls had their own room, then they wouldn't, they would have treated Rosie the way they treated everybody else. She wouldn't have gotten the special treatment of speaking with them. Now, the three girls loved to play with dolls a lot, making up storylines for them and personalities, and creating this fantasy world for their dolls. Like the typical little girl does with her baby dolls or her Barbie dolls when she's playing. And while Rosie was able to partake in the fantasy world play, yet she also could distinguish reality, the twins were not. The fantasy world they created for their dolls became their reality. They even kept detailed records of the events happening in these dolls' lives, like their births, marriages, sicknesses or injuries, deaths, kind of like what we do in the real world, but just, we mentally keep tabs on when that type of stuff happens. But the twins would record these events in extreme details in their journals. And the deaths and the illnesses were always on like the extreme end of the spectrum. However, all of the fantasy doll play that the twins were engaged in resulted in the girls starting to talk more, but exclusively through the dolls. But they were talking more. At around this time, June and Jennifer began to write short stories. Most of the fully formed stories were created by June, while Jennifer preferred to create illustrated tales and cartoons. The girls were no strangers to writing, though. One Christmas, they were given journals, and from that point on, the girls wrote in their journals every day, often describing a lonely, isolated life, which was filled with unhappiness and anger at one another because they felt stuck in their twinship. And an interesting point found in the twins' journaling was that both felt like they couldn't break away from the other twin and become, their own person, regardless from all the help their teachers, parents, therapists were giving them to help them both kind of create an individual persona. The twins felt like they just could not separate, not even in the slightest manner. It would result in death for one of them, and both of the twins were not willing to make that sacrifice for the other one. So it left them stuck and reliant on one another. The twins' oldest sister, Greta, was due to get married, and their mother felt it was important for the entire family to be there, even the twins, despite their very strange behavior in public. So on the day of the wedding, the family arrived to celebrate, this beautiful moment in Greta's life, and the twins stood stiff as boards with their arms hanging at like a very strange, unnatural angle, and their eyes once again staring down at the floor. They stayed that way for 4 hours until they were physically moved to another room. They were put into a position, for the family photo with the bride and the groom, but never spoke a word to anyone or made eye contact with anyone. June later admitted in her journal how they basically kind of ruined Greta's wedding day from that point on. The twins were no longer invited to any more family functions. When the twins had turned 18, they decided to put the dolls up and turn their interest of writing into a career, hoping to become novelists. The 2 oldest siblings had moved out of the house at this time, freeing up a bedroom. That became Rosie, the little baby sister, the youngest of the family. That became her room, so she could move in and have her own room. The twins still stayed in the bedroom together, but they saw this as a betrayal, so now they refused to speak to Rosie. But they could be heard typing away on their typewriters that they had acquired. June was the first to finish her novel. It was called Pepsi Cola Addict, and was about an American boy who was seduced by his teacher and sent to a reform school. He later joined a gang of youth and started committing crimes, landing him in prison. She sent her novel off to a publishing house in the spring of 1984. Jennifer wrote 2 novels. The first one was called Pugilist, which was about a doctor who was desperate to save his ill son. So he killed the family dog to transplant the dog's heart into his sick boy. The spirit of the dog lived on in his child, but later turns and tries to get revenge against the father. Her second novel was called Discomania, and it was about people who live in a violent society where riots and murders occur at their school and in their neighborhoods on a daily basis. The people go to a disco, but the music is creating violence in the young people, and they all start attacking and killing one another. Now, June's manuscript was accepted and offered to be published for a $980 fee. June had negotiated to pay that in monthly payments. Jennifer's manuscript was never accepted. She would send them to multiple different publishing companies, but no one accepted them. The girls continued to write more scripts in hopes to becoming famous and rich, but all of their script, with the exception of June's first, was rejected. They soon grew tired of the ongoing struggle writers go through and turned their obsession to boys. Their old obsession with Lance Kennedy from school had not died down quite yet. In fact, the girls were able to track Lance down by calling the U.S. Naval Base over and over and over again until they were able to convince one of the switchboard operators that they were the family members of the Kennedy family, and finally got in contact with Wayne Kennedy, one of Lance's brothers. But Lance had already moved back to the U.S. by this time and joined the Navy. This did not stop the twins from calling Wayne every day to try and get information out of him about Lance. Wayne felt the girls didn't sound like they were true Americans they claimed to have been, but he didn't care. He told them, come on up to his home, because Wayne was a party animal and would invite anyone out for a drink. That's what he was doing. So the girls jumped in a cab and took it to a rough area of town where this bar was located that Wayne had invited them to. And Wayne said that he, would meet him there, but Wayne wasn't there. The girls wandered the streets. They wandered the streets to see if maybe they could find the Kennedys' home, but they had no money, and it was getting dark rather quickly. They had to walk home. They now were eager for adventure, and they started taking a cab to that same town, like that same area, and hung out around the recreational center. Now they're starting to become influenced by the rough crowd over there on that side of town. June and Jennifer start shoplifting. The girls were never able to get Wayne to meet them, but they did somehow manage to get his home address. The twins were now becoming fixated on the Kennedy family. They went to their house one April morning and went around the back of the house to peep in the windows. When they noticed no one was home and that the front door was unlocked, they just let themselves in. They wandered around the house, observing, like snooping through everything until they stumbled upon the boys' room. Here is where they went through all of the drawers, the closet, the nightstand, even trying on their clothes. They found a camera sitting on the desk, and they took pictures of them sitting on the bed. Then they went downstairs and just made themselves comfortable in the living room, just, propping up their feet, watching TV until they heard a noise. They jumped up, they ran to the back door, jumping out of the window, but as the girls were sneaking out of the window, George and Diane Kennedy caught a glimpse of them escaping. So George ran around the front of the house while the girls were running up the side of the house, but he had a good idea of who they were. They had to have been the ones calling the house every single day for weeks now. It wasn't hard to figure that out. George asked the girls who they were, but the girls froze and went silent. With no response from the girls, George was nice enough to call a cab and told the girls to not return to their home, as the boys weren't there and, were gone on holiday. But this didn't stop the girls, because they returned again the very next day. And they found their way to Wayne's room, taking pictures home with them of Wayne that they took from his bedroom. Knowing what Wayne looks like, because they got pictures of him, the girls would roam the streets trying to find him. They saw him once, but they were too scared to approach him to say hi. They kept calling the Kennedy house day after day after day until finally they got in touch with one of the other brothers, Jerry. After convincing Jerry to come meet them, the girls also had Jerry convince Wayne to come meet them at their house. So Jerry and Wayne set off to go to the girls' house to meet them. You can only imagine how excited the twins were at this point. At 10 p.m., Jerry and Wayne had arrived at the twins' house. Their parents and Rosie had been out of town visiting the oldest sister, Greta. After the initial awkwardness had worn off, the four of them sat down in the living room to watch a movie. But soon after the boys left and told the twins to meet them at the mall the very next day because they could get them some marijuana. The infatuation that the girls once had for Lance has now shifted to Wayne. And they would get all dolled up for these meetings they had at the mall with Wayne. They were just, desperate to impress him and felt that indulging in drugs and alcohol would impress the 17-year-old boy. With cigarettes pressed to their lips and bottles of vodka in their hands, the girls were now feeling more relaxed and were talking up a storm. But their speech impediments, alongside, drinking, made it very difficult to really understand them. The girls, alongside the Kennedy boys, got high, and Jennifer started making out with Wayne. And this became like an everyday thing, that the girls would show up to hang out with Wayne and Jerry, to get high or drink, and, they would start throwing themselves at these boys. But Wayne had already decided that, he just wasn't interested in hanging out with June or Jennifer anymore. However, his 14-year-old brother Carl was. Carl was a sex-crazed teenage boy and figured June and Jennifer would be easy pickings. As he had planned, he started messing around with both twins, but liked Jennifer better as she responded to his behaviors towards her better and introduced her to rough sex. One time, Carl told June to watch while he and Jennifer were engaging in relations. And during this time, June became jealous of Carl and Jennifer. The once perfectly synced twins were now becoming out of sync with one another. One day, while the girls were in their room, Jennifer sensed June's anger and jealousy, but decided she was just gonna lash out first. So she grabbed the radio and she used the cord to wrap it around June's neck. Still mad at Jennifer, June decided she was going to get revenge. As the two were walking near a stream that was like in full swing, June had shoved Jennifer into the stream, jumping in after her and shoving her head, like shoving it underwater. At this time, a car was driving by and the headlights had like blared in June's eyes. Jennifer begged her sister for forgiveness, and the two girls sat there crying together. Since Jennifer had been with Carl like physically and intimately, it was now June's turn. A week or two later, the girls met up with the Kennedy boys and they all, got drunk, and June lost her virginity that night to Carl while her sister watched. The girls continued to hang out with Carl, getting high and drunk. And he was mean and nasty to these girls. Like, he was just cruel to them, and they didn't seem to mind at all. It just didn't seem to bother them. They started wearing wigs into town when they would hang out with Carl, and he would tell them repeatedly like just how ugly they were, and even attempted to burn the wigs with one of his cigarettes, like while it was on their head. He started throwing lit matches at the girls and then started punching and kicking Jennifer just to quickly turn around and start fondling and kissing her. And you have to remember that in Jennifer's fantasy world from when she was younger with like the dolls, and even in her novels, it was very like soap opera based, so when they were mean and nasty, and then they would turn passionate and loving, and, that's what she has always desired. So now she's convinced that, Carl's abuse, if you want to call it that, is love. Now, a month later, the Kennedys were packing up to move back to the U.S. The girls made one final visit to the family. The girls had asked Wayne and Carl for some souvenirs before they had left to remember their time together. The boys gave them like an old t-shirt, some random socks, some matches, and a jean jacket. As the girls walked away from the Kennedy house for the last time, the once exciting lives the two girls had was now filled with, sadness and emptiness. And to fill that void, they started a life of crime. They had stolen bikes so that they could travel to other neighborhoods. And once the girls were caught red-handed, the police were called. However, the police figured out who the two girls were, and they didn't want to deal with the silence. They didn't want to deal with them and their awkward behaviors that they, transitioned back to. They just dropped them off at home instead of taking them down to the station, charging them with theft. The girls were still chasing after the excitement that the Kennedy boys had brought them, and often wore bizarre costumes with wigs. They were drunk and roamed around town looking for something to fill that void. Their mother was often at Greta's house helping with the grandchildren, and their father had picked up more hours at work. So both parents were very blind to the behavior that the neighborhood was, witnessing coming from the girls, and their behavior only got worse. In September of 1981, the girls had broken into a nearby adult training school, stealing a few items the first time, but continued to go back to the school and continued to break in week after week, stealing even more the next time and more the next time and more the next time. The girls then started calling the police station to, taunt the police at how they, broke into this adult training school, but the police would never be able to find them. Growing bored of breaking into buildings, the girls now turned their interest into being an arsonist. The girls' first act of arson took place on October 24th. They climbed over the fence that had surrounded a tractor store. They broke into the building, stealing small items, and then pouring gasoline all over every room. And before you knew it, the building was up in flames. The fire department arrived, and the damage had already been done. The damages done was worth more than $100,000, plus an injured firefighter. And in November, the twins vandalized another school. Their last act was on November 8th, 1981. They threw a brick through a window at the nearby technical college. An officer quickly arrived, calling for backup. As the officers entered the building, they were able to grab June and Jennifer, preventing them from dropping a match on the now gasoline-covered furnishings inside. The girls were taken down to the station and their parents were called. All right, that is all I have for part 2. You will need to stick tuned for part 3 because it gets real interesting. But until then, please let me know what you guys think, because I'm telling you what, these twins are just... they're a handful, aren't they? They are. They're a handful. And until next time, please remember to be safe, and I will see you then. Bye.